My dad stood up at my cousin's graduation dinner and told 43 people that I was the reason our family never moved forward. Not my fault the company failed. Not the economy. Me. Specifically me. By name. He had a microphone. My uncle had rented one of those little wireless clip-ons for the speeches, and my dad waited until the dessert plates were being cleared, stood up from his chair at the head of the table and said, "Before we celebrate tonight, I want to address something that's been weighing on this family." I thought he was going to talk about my grandfather's health, or maybe announce that he and my mom were finally selling the house in Dayton. He looked straight at me and said, "Nora has been quietly undermining this family's finances for 3 years. She knows what she did, and I think everyone at this table deserves to know too." The whole room went quiet. My cousin, the one we were supposed to be celebrating, cap and gown photos still propped up on the side table, looked at me with her mouth open. I was 31 years old, sitting in the third chair from the left, holding a glass of sparkling cider, and my father just accused me of financially sabotaging our family in front of his brother, his sister-in-law, 4 cousins, my grandmother, 2 of my grandmother's friends from church, and a 17-year-old kid who had just gotten into Michigan State. He wasn't finished. She had access to the books. She had the passwords. And when the audit came back, her name was all over the discrepancies. I trusted her because she was my daughter. That was my mistake. I set my glass down very carefully. I remember that specifically, making sure it didn't make a sound when it touched the tablecloth. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up and start explaining myself. I looked at my dad for maybe 3 full seconds, and then I looked at my grandmother, who was staring at her dessert plate like she wanted to fall through the floor. Then I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, picked up my purse, and walked out. I didn't say a word to anyone. I drove home in the rain with the radio off, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 20 minutes just breathing. That night I sent 3 emails. 6 weeks later, my phone rang 41 times in a single weekend. But let me back up. Because if I just tell you the ending, you won't understand why none of what happened surprised me. And you won't understand why walking out of that restaurant was the easiest thing I'd done in years. My dad started the family business when I was 9, Reeves Caldwell Property Management. He later dropped Caldwell when his partner left, but kept the name because the branding was already printed on 300 folders. He managed rental properties for landlords who didn't want to deal with tenants directly. Maintenance calls, lease renewals, eviction filings, the whole thing. Growing up, the business was the center of everything. Dinner conversations were about vacancy rates and contractor bids. Family vacations got canceled twice for closing deadlines. My dad coached my brother's soccer team for 1 season and quit because the schedule conflicts were unsustainable. I was the one who stayed interested, though. My brother checked out early, left for college in Arizona, and basically never came back except for Christmas. But I genuinely liked the puzzle of it, how you could take a building that was bleeding money and turn it around with the right systems. I used to sit in my dad's office after school and reorganize his filing cabinets just because they bothered me. When I graduated with a degree in business administration, my dad offered me a job. Property coordinator, then assistant manager. Then, by the time I was 28, he gave me access to the accounting software and told me I was essentially the operations manager, though he never actually changed my title or my salary to match. I want to be honest about something here, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I loved that job. Not in the way you love something easy, in the way you love something you're genuinely good at. I knew every property on our roster, every landlord's quirks, which contractors would actually show up when they said they would. I built out a whole new vendor tracking system from scratch. I caught a billing error that had been costing us $400 a month for over a year. My dad told me that last part was good catch and moved on. That was pretty much the template for how appreciation worked in our family. Functional acknowledgement. No excess. The issue with the audit started with Kevin. Kevin was my dad's bookkeeper, had been for 11 years. Sweet guy, genuinely, but completely overwhelmed. My dad had expanded the portfolio faster than Kevin could keep up with, and somewhere in the chaos of 2021, new properties, pandemic-era lease complications, the shift to digital payments, things got messy. Entries that should have been categorized one way got filed another. Vendor payments that should have been split across properties got allocated wrong. When the accountant came in for the annual review, she flagged 6 accounts with discrepancies. I was the one who had been cleaning up Kevin's entries for 8 months by that point. I had access to everything. My fingerprints, digitally speaking, were all over the books because I had been trying to fix them. I explained this to my dad. In writing. Twice. He said he understood. And then 4 months later, he stood up at a restaurant with a clip-on microphone and told my entire extended family that I was the problem. What I understood in that parking lot, sitting in my car in the rain, was that my father had made a decision, not about the books. Those were genuinely just a mess that Kevin and I had both contributed to in different ways. The decision he made was about the story. He needed a story that made sense of why the business was struggling, why the expansion hadn't gone the way he planned, why there were uncomfortable questions from the accountant. And I was a much tidier explanation than I grew too fast and my systems couldn't keep up. I had known for a while that something was shifting. Little things. The way he'd started CCing himself on emails I sent to vendors. The way he'd ask me to walk him through decisions I'd been making independently for 2 years. The way my ideas and meetings started getting attributed to something we've been discussing, rather than to me specifically. I had told myself I was imagining it. That's the thing about growing up in a family where you've always been the dependable one. You learn to sand down your own perceptions. You gaslight yourself before anyone else has to. That night in the parking lot, I stopped doing that. The 3 emails I sent were, 1 to the Property Management Association that certified our business, requesting a copy of the formal audit procedure and complaint filing process. Just information gathering, but the kind that creates a paper trail. 1 to the accountant who had done our review, asking if she'd be available for a consultation as an independent contractor, professional, brief, no details. 1 to my own personal accountant who I'd been using for my taxes for 4 years, asking if she had time to meet that week. I did not email my father. I did not text my mother to process what happened. I went inside, made tea, and went to sleep. The next morning, I went to work. I was professional. I answered emails. I scheduled a maintenance call for a property in Westerville. I acted like nothing had happened because I had decided that acting like nothing had happened was exactly the right move. What I did not do was continue fixing Kevin's entries. What I did not do was follow up on 3 vendor contracts that were coming up for renewal. Contracts I had been personally managing for 2 years, relationships I had built from scratch. What I did not do was share the updated property condition reports I had finished compiling the week before. I didn't delete anything. I didn't sabotage anything. I just stopped being the invisible scaffolding holding everything up, and I did it so quietly that it took weeks for anyone to notice. My mom called me 8 days after the restaurant. "Your father feels terrible," she said. I said, "Okay. He didn't mean for it to come out the way it did." "How did he mean for it to come out?" She paused. "He's been under a lot of stress, Nora." I said, "I know. I've been watching it for 3 years. I hope things get easier for him." And I meant it, genuinely, without any bitterness, because I had already started to understand that what happened at that restaurant was the last thing my father did to me, not the latest in a series of things he would keep doing. That distinction mattered a lot. She asked if I'd come to Sunday dinner. I said I wouldn't be able to. I kept going to work. I kept being professional. I had quietly updated my resume 2 weeks before the restaurant. Not because I had any specific plan, but because I'm the kind of person who likes to have things in order. I had also, over the previous 8 months of cleaning up those books, kept very detailed personal notes. Not out of suspicion. I'm just organized. But those notes had dates, entries, exactly what I had corrected and why. Around week 3, one of our biggest landlords, a woman named Patricia who owned 11 properties in our portfolio and had been a client for 6 years, sent my dad an email saying she was evaluating her management options and wanted to schedule a call. Patricia and I had talked every other week for 2 years. I knew her kids' names. I'd helped her navigate a nightmare tenant dispute that saved her close to $18,000 in potential legal fees. She hadn't heard from me in 3 weeks. Because I hadn't reached out. Around week 4, 2 of the vendor contracts lapsed. One of them, the landscaping contractor for 4 properties, had already been contacted by a competing management firm because my dad didn't know the renewal was coming and I hadn't reminded him. I had always just handled it. Week 5, my dad called me into his office and asked if I was okay because I seemed off. I said I was fine, just tired, working through some things. He nodded and said he appreciated my dedication. I looked at him and thought about the clip-on microphone and the 43 people and my grandmother staring at her plate, and I said, "Thank you, I really have given a lot to this place." He didn't hear it. He was already looking back at his computer. I gave my 2 weeks' notice on a Tuesday morning. Typed up a clean, professional letter. No explanation beyond pursuing other opportunities. Left it on his desk before he got in. He called me 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded confused more than anything, like a system had failed in a way he hadn't anticipated. I had already 3 days earlier accepted a position with a regional property management firm 3 times the size of my dad's operation. 40% salary increase. Actual title, Director of Operations. I'd also quietly reached out to Patricia and 2 other landlords, not to poach them. I want to be clear about that, but just to let them know I was moving on and to make sure they had direct contacts at my dad's company for anything time-sensitive. Patricia asked for my new work email before I'd even finished the sentence. The 2 weeks was quiet. Professionally quiet. I trained my replacement as thoroughly as I could, because that's who I am, not because I owed anyone anything. And I left on a Friday afternoon without a party or a card, or really much of anything. 6 weeks after my last day, my phone started ringing. My dad, first, twice on a Saturday morning. I didn't pick up. Then my mom. "Your father really needs to talk to you. It's about the business." Then my uncle. The one who'd hosted the graduation dinner, the one who had been sitting right there when my dad took that microphone. He left a voicemail that was 90 seconds of throat clearing and vague references to family situations, and I think there may have been some misunderstandings. Then Patricia called my personal cell, which she had, and told me she had formally ended her contract with my dad's company and was asking if my new firm took on clients of her portfolio size. I told her I'd have someone reach out to her on Monday. She said, "I always knew where the work was actually coming from." That was the one that stayed with me. Over that weekend, I got 41 calls and messages. Some were from family members I hadn't talked to in months. My cousin, the one from the graduation dinner, the Michigan State one, texted me to say she had heard some stuff, and she hoped I was okay and she believed me, and that one I did respond to, because she was 22 and had nothing to do with any of it and she deserved a response. My dad left a voicemail on Sunday night that was different from the Saturday ones, less confused, more raw. He said the accountant had come back with a fuller picture and that he understood now that the situation had been more complicated than he had presented it. He said he had been under pressure and he had made a serious error in judgment. He said he wanted to talk, if I was open to it. I listened to that voicemail 4 times. What I noticed was that it was still, even in the apology, framed around what he needed. He wanted to talk. He wanted resolution. He wanted to explain. There was no actual question about what I needed or how I was doing. I didn't call back that day. I've thought a lot about what I should feel about my dad. People always expect a certain arc, the injury, the anger, the eventual softening, the lesson about forgiveness and family, and how blood is thicker and all of that. I've tried to be honest with myself about whether I'm holding on to something I should let go of, whether I'm punishing him when I could be healing. But here's what I keep coming back to. The night he stood up with that microphone, I had been working for him for 6 years. I had built systems he still relies on. I had relationships he didn't even know existed until they started believing. I had flagged problems, fixed problems, documented everything, asked for nothing except to be treated like someone whose work meant something. And when he needed a story, he picked me, not Kevin, who had actually made the entries. Not himself, for expanding too fast. Me. And the reason he picked me was precisely because he knew I would handle it quietly. That I would absorb it. That I had always absorbed things. He was right that I handled it quietly. He just miscalculated what quietly looks like when it's no longer in his direction. I did eventually respond to my dad. About 3 weeks after the voicemail, I sent him an email, not a call, because I needed the record and because I think more clearly in writing. I told him that I had heard what he said and I understood he was under pressure. I told him that I wished him well with the business and that I hoped he and Kevin could get the accounting structure stable. I told him that I wasn't in a place where a conversation felt right and that I'd reach out when and if that changed. I thanked him for the years of experience. I meant it. He wrote back 2 sentences. He said he was sorry and that he loved me. Short, this time, no requests. That felt like something. Not enough to change anything, but something. My new job is better than I had let myself imagine a job could be. I'm 3 months in and I've already restructured 2 processes that were costing the firm money in ways nobody had noticed. My manager said in my first review that I was exactly what this team needed. She said it in a meeting in front of 4 other people, and I looked at the table for a second because I wasn't sure how to receive it without something breaking open in my chest a little. Patricia signed with our firm last month. 11 properties. She sent me a plat for my office, one of those big leafy ones that takes up a whole corner, with a card that said, "Every good operation needs the right person running it." I put the card on my desk where I can see it. My brother texted me when he heard about everything. He said, "I'm not surprised. I left for a reason," which was helpful in a limited way. My grandmother called me on my birthday, like she always does, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. She didn't mention the restaurant. Neither did I. Some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. I go to Sunday dinners occasionally now, not every week, not out of obligation. When I feel like it, and only when I feel like it. My dad is different with me. Careful, in a way he wasn't before, which is its own kind of acknowledgement. We don't talk about the business. We talk about neutral things, weather and food and what my cousin is studying. It's not what I would have wanted if you'd asked me 5 years ago. It's not the father I used to imagine having, the one who would look at the vendor tracking system and the cleaned up accounts and say, "You built something real here." But I built something real. I know that now without needing him to say it. And honestly, that might be the better outcome. I think about that dinner table a lot. Not with anger. That surprised me, actually, how little anger there was once enough time had passed. What I think about mostly is the microphone. The fact that my dad had to pick it up and use it. The fact that he needed an audience. That tells you everything about how the whole thing worked. People who have actually done something wrong tend to handle it quietly. They fix it or they hide it or they come to you directly when no one else is watching. People who need a story. People who need to explain away something uncomfortable about themselves. They go looking for a room. They go looking for witnesses. Because the story only works if other people believe it first. My dad didn't stand up that night because he was certain I had wronged him. He stood up because he needed 43 people to be certain of it so that he could be certain of it too. That's not justice. That's theater. And I think some part of me understood that in the parking lot, sitting in the rain even before I had the language to name it. What I've come to believe, not from anyone telling me, just from watching how things actually unfold, is that the truth has a weight to it that performance doesn't. You can say something into a microphone in front of a room full of people, and for a while it sounds definitive. But the truth keeps existing whether or not anyone is looking at it. Patricia knew where the work was coming from. The vendors knew whose calls they were returning. The contracts knew whose name was on them. None of that changed because my father gave a speech. And here's the thing about quietly building something real. It doesn't disappear when you stop. It just becomes visible in a way it wasn't before. I didn't have to do anything dramatic. I didn't have to defend myself or fight back or prove anything to anyone. I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine to carry, and the weight of it landed exactly where it belonged. I want to be careful here because I don't think I'm some exceptional person for handling it the way I did. I was scared. I had a lot of days where I wanted to send an email I would have regretted. What kept me from it wasn't discipline exactly, it was more like clarity. Once I stopped trying to manage how my father saw me, I had so much more energy for everything else. That energy went into my resume, into my notes, into the new job, into showing up every day at a place that actually wanted what I was offering. That's what I'd say to anyone in a version of that situation. Not be patience. Patience for its own sake is just suffering with better branding. But figure out what is actually yours and what isn't. Figure out what you've been carrying that belongs to someone else's story about themselves, and then put it down, not as a punishment for them, as a gift to yourself. The 6 years I gave that company were real. The vendor relationships were real. The systems were real. Kevin's disorganized entries were real, and so were my corrections. None of that changed based on what my father said into a microphone. He just couldn't see it until I wasn't there anymore. I'm not sure he fully sees it even now, but I've stopped needing him to. That's probably the truest thing I can say about where I've landed. I don't need the person who underestimated me to correct his estimate. I just need to keep doing the work. It turns out that's enough. More than enough, actually.